What's up, y'all? This is Pastor Tommy Forrester of Epiphany Fellowship, LA. We want to invite you into this thing we're starting called Sunday Wraps. We want to give you a little glimpse into some of the things that we're talking about at gatherings, that we're engaging in our community as a church plant that is seeking to pursue Jesus' purpose in our city for the good of all people. So we're going to start off, we've just been talking about some manhood dynamics, and so I'm excited as you join us as we dive into some manhood dynamics. So brother, I'm excited, man, to talk about some issues of manhood today. So let's dive in. Richard, get us going, man.
Okay, fellas, thank you for gathering today. The first question we'll throw out there is, what is biblical manhood?
I think there's like two major things that I think about with manhood. Initially, God created all of us in the image of God. God created us as men, and men and women have unique characteristics, and I think in our culture it's very difficult for us to talk about these things. Secondly, I think about Jesus, who to me in a lot of ways is the perfect man, and obviously Jesus has so many amazing characteristics, but when it comes to being a man, what is it that we can glean from him? So just to kick off, those are the two things I think about immediately: creation and then any perfect example.
Yeah,
That's good.
I agree with that. I think whenever I'm in a position of where I'm trying to see what is biblical manhood, I love reading the Gospels and watching how Jesus navigated every aspect of life. And that gives me a picture of what it is to be a man, because he was the ultimate man.
The Bible as a whole, it provides plenty of examples of what manhood doesn't look like, just faults or mistakes, just real people, you know, in history. And you know, there's a lot of different things that we can learn from all of these examples.
From Adam, from one man, Acts would say, came all the nations of the world. And there's, within this first image bearer existed the capacity for God to multiply men to look all different ways and have different cultural backgrounds and doing all that. And yet it seems like there's a common denominator in the fact that we were created in the image of God. What would y'all say are some of the, and Eden, you alluded to some of this, what would we say are some of the significant things about this tying of being an image bearer of God and manhood today? And does that pertain to only one cultural expression?
And I think we have diversity because God purposely created diversity. I know men of different nationalities, cultures, different backgrounds, and I've had the opportunity to see how Christ through them displays manhood. So just because you're a certain race, nationality, or ethnic group doesn't limit your ability to display biblical manhood.
Yeah, I agree. Just getting to some characteristics, and you guys can chime in on a lot more, but you know, I think with biblical manhood you have leadership, responsibility, the ability to make sacrifices, the ability to make difficult decisions. Those and many other characteristics that we can talk about are common across every culture, because those are core biblical mandates. But every culture, I think, struggles with them in a different way. Every culture is going to have their own flavor for how sort of someone either struggles with it or is leaning in a good direction or a bad direction. Like even for me, going out and starting a business, you don't have a lot of Asian men examples. Or if I wanted to be an actor, for example, you don't see a lot of Asian men in Hollywood. Or if I wanted to be in politics, you just don't see that very much. And that is, a lot of that has to do with the cultural context of how Asian men are raised up. And so I'd say the core elements, I think, are there, but different people are going to struggle with different things because of the context in which they come from. So I don't know if you guys have kind of experiences from your background in terms of like, how do people perceive a black man, or how do people perceive a white man, and how does that affect your ability to be a true biblical man?
Yeah, it makes me think when you brought up cultural flavors. I mean, just for example, growing up, for myself, I turned to a lot of my peers, and maybe they were just like really young men still trying to find their way, we would turn to one another. We would use that avenue as well as media, and not necessarily the best examples that are out there, but when you talk about cultural flavors, it makes me think of that and how those avenues have a way of shaping our manhood for good or for bad.
Right. Henry makes a really good point of, I think sometimes I hear a lot of people criticizing men who haven't had an example before them to show them how a man is supposed to act. So they're getting it from, as he stated, from entertainment, or maybe they watched their uncle or other men in the neighborhood, and they felt like this is what manhood is, when in all actuality it isn't. So I think there's a generation now that's walking around with a flawed view of what manhood really is. I think real biblical manhood is very foreign to the thought of many guys today.
As we look at some of the characteristics, manhood would be displayed in different seasonings from heaven, if you will, like different ways that God has created us. And each one has different expressions, but there's a fundamental, and you have this idea of men. As men, we're all called to accept responsibility, and that's an underlying thing, regardless of whatever culture you are. That's accepting responsibility, right? But then you also have the idea of rejecting passivity. So it'll look different to evade conflict or be passive. We all struggle with that in different ways. But then you had the idea of leading courageously, even as we were talking about what does that look like to lead courageously, but then also expecting the greater reward. And for us, image bearer of God, he calls us to those underlying things, to live those out as a reflection with the reality of 400 years of racism, and you have classism embedded in that, and you have all these isms of the world that then has distorted this so deeply that I think it's time we begin to have some of the conversations at Epiphany, having conversations as many are going on in the body of Christ, but in very real talk to talk about manhood. So I think that's something for us to consider as we move forward in these discussions.
Well, fellas, this has been an interesting conversation. Definitely enjoyed talking to you all about manhood. Looking forward to future conversations as well. And we welcome you to tune in next time as we continue to discuss what is biblical manhood. God bless.